It's been a while, infertile woman. I raised my head at the familiar voice. Standing before me was my ex-husband, Donald, wearing a crooked smile and a wrinkled shirt. He walked straight toward me. As he approached within a few feet, my daughter Sarah hid behind me. Donald stared at Sarah and said, "What's this? After divorcing me, you went and found a guy with a kid to marry. How pathetic." Sarah clung to my leg, frightened by the stranger in front of her. I hesitated but continued the conversation. "What are you talking about? This is my child. What are you saying? You were infertile. You couldn't have children when we were together." He let out a loud, mocking laugh. He still wanted to believe I was beneath him, and apparently, he still believed I couldn't have children. I took a deep breath and replied, "Huh, still sticking to that story. It's pathetic." Donald laughed, holding his stomach. I gently nudged Sarah forward. "Look carefully. Doesn't her face seem familiar to you?" "What, a kid's face? I don't." Donald's expression froze as he took a closer look at Sarah. "The dad is." "You're her." I told Donald the truth. His face went pale as he looked back and forth between Sarah's face and mine. "My name is Adele. It's been 5 years since I married Joseph, a successful business owner, and now we're both in our 30s. We have a peaceful marriage, and together, we raise our 3-year-old daughter, Sarah, while enjoying a happy life." Sarah can be quite precocious, but she's still a child at heart, and our days are always busy. "Mom, should I wear this ribbon today? Or does the other one match my skirt better?" "Let's go with the one on the right. It's prettier." Joseph watched us, smiling. "Sarah's going to grow up to be a wonderful woman, just like you, Adele." "Oh, flattery won't get you anywhere." We laughed together. On the surface, we looked like any ordinary couple, but Joseph was in his first marriage, and I had been divorced before. A few years ago, I was married to my ex-husband, Donald, who turned out to be the worst man I had ever met. Even now, I regret why I ever married him. I originally worked as an employee at a company. Donald was my boss at the same workplace. I was drawn to his kind, charming smile and his competence at work. I was probably innocent back then, easily captivated by such superficial things as his appearance and work ethic. On top of that, he was the son of the company's owner. As we grew closer, Donald began to make relentless advances. "Hey, why don't we get married? I really like you." He'd say things like that while we were having lunch together. "Stop teasing me, please. You're probably saying the same thing to lots of other women." "Wow, you don't trust me, huh? That's not true at all." He would sulk and poke at his food, and even that seemed endearing to me at the time. At first, I wasn't too keen on the idea of marriage. "If we get married, we should buy a house in that area. It's convenient, and the view is beautiful." "In that area? Isn't that place really expensive?" "Don't worry, I make a decent living, you know." But as the discussions progressed, I began to think, if I marry this man, my future will be secure. That was my fatal mistake. I ended up agreeing to marry him. When our marriage was finalized, I was ordered to quit my job by his parents. "There's no need for a woman to keep working at a company. You need to come live with us and learn how to manage the household perfectly. You're young, and that's your advantage. You'd better absorb as much as you can quickly." Yes, I was overwhelmed by the pressure from my in-laws, but I was young and naive, so I complied with their demands. I still didn't know much about the world, and was probably a bit oblivious to what was happening. It had already been decided that I would live with Donald's parents after the wedding, but I had accepted that. "Well, just for the beginning. You'll need to learn how we run things around here." "That's true. I also want to get along with your parents. I figured we'd eventually have our own home, and I was somewhat resigned to endure it for a few years. Besides, being married to the company president's son gave me a certain status, so I convinced myself it was worth it. Even my mom was happy about the marriage and congratulated me. I can't believe you're getting married so soon. I'll miss you, but I want you to be happy. She said that with a smile. My mother's words gave me the courage to go through with the marriage. But life was far harsher than I had anticipated. Living with my in-laws from the start became a source of constant suffering for me. Although I had graduated from a local university and secured a job, from the perspective of my in-laws, it was considered nothing more than a third-rate regional school. Perhaps that's why Donald and his parents looked down on and ridiculed my alma mater. You really can't do anything, can you? If it weren't for me taking pity on you, you wouldn't have been able to marry anyone. I graduated from a prestigious women's college, yet you are from a third-rate university. I'm amazed you even had the nerve to marry into this family. They would laugh about it regularly. My mother-in-law, Charlotte, often belittled me while tending to her hobby of flower arrangement. If Donald hadn't approached you, no one else would have even noticed you. You aren't exceptionally talented at anything, nor are you a beauty. You're just young, that's all. I have no idea why he ended up marrying someone like you. The things they said were harsh. I endured it, feeling utterly alone. Donald, meanwhile, mocked me both at the company and during family gatherings. He would laugh at the way I served coffee or at my every little gesture. My incompetent wife, he would say, making me the butt of every joke, spreading numerous insults about me. For instance, she burns everything when she cooks, lets pots boil over, she's a disaster in the kitchen. Donald would exaggerate everything, smoothly recounting seemingly plausible but false stories. I couldn't bear it, so I pretended not to hear. I mean, she can't even do laundry properly. Colors bleed into each other. Can you believe that in this day and age? He would leave everyone around us bewildered. None of this was true. I had been taught strict household skills by my mom from a young age, and I was following Charlotte's exact methods for brewing coffee. Yet, no matter what, they constantly found ways to belittle and mock me. If I did anything even slightly differently, Charlotte's words would cut deep, and my in-laws didn't see me as anything more than a cheap housekeeper, treating me with barely any respect. In fact, a paid housekeeper probably would have been treated better. Adele, the rooms aren't cleaned properly. What have you been doing all day? You're so slow and unfocused. Nothing gets done. I'm sorry. To be fair, it was a large house, and there were indeed areas where I couldn't get to the cleaning in time. I apologized and got to work on whatever task my in-laws ordered me to do. Despite all the complaints, I worked hard to keep the house in order, to take care of them, and to make sure everyone was in a good mood. But marrying the company president's son came with its own set of problems. So Adele, when are you going to give us a grandchild? Yes, the heir issue became a constant topic. I wasn't able to get pregnant, and my in-laws frequently blamed me for it. I went to the hospital numerous times, seeking advice, but nothing worked. Donald never defended me either. It's because she's barren. She can't get pregnant. She really can't do anything right, can she? He sighed, shaking his head. I'm sorry. I apologized, though it wasn't my fault, just to save face in front of my in-laws. Despite all this, when I visited a gynecologist, I was told there were no particular issues. This only deepened my confusion and frustration. The gift of children is something beyond our control, the doctor advised me, though it gave little comfort. I left feeling defeated. I tried drinking fertility teas, adjusting my diet, and changing my lifestyle, eagerly hoping for a miracle. But the signs of pregnancy never came. Not once. My goodness. What's the point of this marriage if there are no children? Father-in-law, Alexander would shout in a theatrical tone, his words intimidating. Mother-in-law Charlotte added, her voice sharp, really? Having a young wife means nothing if this is the result. I clenched the apron in my hands, desperately holding back tears. In the midst of this torment, I received word that my mother had collapsed. Oh my, I'll come right away. The hospital informed me that her condition was grave, and she was in critical condition. I couldn't sit still, my hands trembling as I prepared to rush to my mom's side. Once ready, I went to Donald and my in-laws to tell them about my mom. I hoped to get their permission to leave. Please, just 2 or 3 days. No, even 1 day is enough. I just need to see my mom. What are you talking about? Of course you can't go, Charlotte replied, trimming the flowers she arranged in the entrance hall. The sound of the flowers being cut echoed sharply in my mind, as if it were pounding in my head. Feeling dizzy, I tried to hold back the sensation and confronted her for the first time in my life. It might be the last time I see her. Please, just let me see her once. She looked at me with disdain, brushing me off as if I were a nuisance. Seeing her won't change anything, you know, Donald said, flipping through a newspaper in his hand. Alexander looked at me and chuckled while sipping his coffee. That's right, Adele. Who's going to make my coffee if you're not here? Stunned by the family's callousness, I could only stand there in shock. In the end, I wasn't allowed to visit my mother. She passed away in the hospital, all alone, without being able to see her family one last time. She quietly slipped away without me by her side, without anyone holding her hand. At her funeral, I finally saw her and could only cling to her and cry. After the funeral, I completely broke down. The events that had transpired left me devastated. I couldn't eat, and after completing the bare minimum of housework, I would collapse into bed each day. For heaven's sake, how long do you plan to stay in bed? You're a wife, aren't you? What about the housework? I'm sorry, I just don't have the energy to get up. Unbelievable. The only thing you have going for you is your youth, and now you can't even get out of bed. Though my in-laws constantly berated me, their words no longer registered. I was utterly drained. I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, but then came the final blow. Donald was having an affair with the company secretary. In shock, I confronted him, grabbing hold of him. How could you do this to me, especially when I'm still grieving for my mother? How heartless can you be? In my rage, I raised my fist. Donald grabbed my arm and threw me onto the sofa. Don't complain when you're infertile. I only married you because you were young. Stop whining about this. His cruel words left me frozen on the sofa. I had been crying endlessly since my mother's death, and my in-laws had grown impatient. Stop crying already. It's disgraceful. How old are you? Crying won't change anything. That's right. Besides, men will always cheat. It's just part of life, Alexander said, laughing. I stared at the two of them in disbelief. And you know, if you can't even bear children, you're useless in this house. If you've got so many complaints, why don't you just leave? Charlotte snapped at me. I couldn't take it any longer. Seeing my desperation, she hastily packed my things and pushed me to leave. Feeling utterly driven out, I left immediately. After a bit of hardship, I found a place to live on my own and ended up divorcing Donald. Donald readily agreed to the divorce, and when we met for the last time at a cafe, he smiled and said, Finally, I don't have to see that miserable face of yours anymore. What a relief. Donald briskly signed the divorce papers and walked out confidently. As I watched him from the window, I noticed the company secretary, the woman he had been cheating with. She stood there, flashing me a triumphant smile. She was younger than me, a flashy girl. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness as I took the divorce papers to the city office. Afterward, I started working and eventually adjusted to my new life. That's when I met Joseph, and, in the end, I remarried. At first, I was hesitant about remarrying, but Joseph was different from Donald. Believing in that difference, I decided to marry him. 5 years have passed since then, and now I'm happy with our 3-year-old daughter, Sarah. I don't even want to think about those days in the past. One day, while I was out for an evening walk with Sarah in the neighborhood, "Mom, look at those pretty flowers. I want to show them to Dad." "Yes, but if we pick them, they'll wilt. It's better to leave them blooming here." "Oh, I see. These flowers belong here, don't they?" Watching Sarah grow up so kind-hearted made me feel deeply grateful for having remarried. "It's been a while, infertile woman." The familiar voice made me look up. There stood my ex-husband, Donald. He had a creepy smile on his face, wearing a rumpled shirt, and walked straight toward me. As he got within a few feet of us, Sarah hid behind me. Donald glanced at Sarah and then sneered. "So, you remarried a man with a kid, huh?" Sarah clung to my leg, frightened by the strange man in front of her. I hesitated but responded, "What are you talking about?" "Well, you're infertile, right? So after our divorce, you found yourself a man with a kid and remarried? You're quite the optimistic one, aren't you?" He burst into laughter, still trying to belittle me, and he clearly believed I was infertile. I exhaled softly and replied, "This child is my daughter." "Huh, still sticking to that lie. How pathetic." Donald laughed, holding his stomach, so I nudged Sarah forward slightly. "Take a good look. Don't you recognize her face?" "Huh? What do you mean, recognize a kid's face?" As he looked more closely at Sarah's face, his expression stiffened. "Because Dad is. You're." I told Donald the truth. As he alternated between looking at Sarah's face and mine, his own face turned pale. Why, I don't understand," he shouted, ruffling his hair in frustration. Donald was frozen in shock. But something even more surprising happened. That's when my current husband, Joseph, called out to us. "Welcome home. You're late," he said with a bright smile, addressing both Sarah and me. Worried that we hadn't returned from our walk, Joseph had come out, still wearing his apron. "Oh no, Joseph, at least take off your apron." I ran over to him. Sorry, I just wondered what was taking you so long." It was Joseph's turn to cook dinner that day, so I had taken Sarah out for a walk to keep her from getting bored. Joseph loved cooking and could whip up more elaborate dishes than I could. "Dad, what's for dinner today?" "Tonight, we're having your favorite beef stew." With that, he lifted Sarah into his arms. "Okay, time to head inside and take a shower before dinner," I said, assuring Joseph and Sarah towards the house. As I felt Donald's gaze burning into my back, we walked a few steps to open the gate of the large house. Suddenly, Donald grabbed hold of the gate. "Wait. Hold on. We're not done talking." Joseph, seeing the strange man's behavior, wore an expression I had never seen before. "Sorry, but no trespassing," he said, moving to remove Donald's hand from the gate. But Donald refused to let go. Joseph, now getting a good look at the man's face, exclaimed, "Wait, is that you, Donald?" His voice carried a hint of surprise and awkwardness. You see, Donald and Joseph knew each other. In fact, they weren't just acquaintances. Joseph was Donald's half-brother. They had been born as half-siblings, sharing the same father. Their parents had remarried, and Joseph had led a difficult childhood. His mother had been forced to divorce and leave the house early, with only Joseph, the boy, being taken in by his father. Later, Alexander married Donald's mother, and after Donald was born, Joseph's existence was all but forgotten. Donald, being the son of the second wife, was the only one cherished by his parents-in-law, while Joseph, the son of the first wife, was neglected. "Dad, don't you need me?" "Well, now that we have Donald, we don't need two men in the house." That's what he was told. In the end, Alexander chose Donald as the heir to his company and kicked Joseph out of the house. "You're not a kid anymore. You can fend for yourself." Finally, the nuisance is gone. What a relief. They laughed as they said those words. Joseph, abandoned by his family, endured countless hardships, but despite everything, he didn't let it break him. He started his own company, which had since grown into a massive enterprise, rivaling the top businesses in the world. "It's been a long time." "How many years has it been?" Joseph said as he patted Donald on the shoulder. Donald, who had been so full of himself moments ago, now looked completely deflated. "He was so thin compared to when we divorced that I barely recognized him until I heard his voice." And Joseph, who hadn't seen Donald in over 10 years, didn't recognize him at first either. "Are you eating properly?" I asked out of politeness in front of Joseph, feigning concern, though truthfully, I wasn't really worried. "Not like I used to," Donald muttered quietly, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. There was nothing left of his former self. Seeing him like this, Sarah, who had been hiding behind me, pulled a candy out of her skirt pocket. "Here, mister. This is yummy. It's my favorite, but I'll share it with you," she said, offering it to him. Donald hesitated at first, but then reached out and took the candy. "Thank you." He looked as if he might cry, but managed to thank Sarah. Perhaps her kindness had touched something deep inside him, even though he had been so cruel. Watching Donald and Joseph reunite brought back memories for me. My meeting with Joseph had been pure coincidence. At that time, I was working as a waitress in a restaurant. The pay wasn't great, but I liked that it was close to where I lived and had a chic atmosphere. It was a quiet place, and the owner was friendly, offering me full-time work. Joseph had been a regular customer at that restaurant. "What's the special today?" "Yes, today's recommendation is this dish here." Joseph always ordered the daily special, and over time, that brought us closer. At first, we just chatted about world events, the weather, and local shops, nothing serious. But eventually, I realized that Joseph was making an effort to get to know me. "Adele, do you have someone you're seeing?" "Oh, sorry if that's too personal." "No, it's fine. Actually, I've just been through a divorce, so I'm not really thinking about that right now." "Really? That's surprising. Whoever let you go must have made a mistake." He laughed, and in that moment, I noticed how much he resembled Donald. Because of that, I remained cautious during our conversations. But eventually, Joseph seriously asked me out, over and over again. I was scared of how much Joseph's face reminded me of Donald. I worried that he might change, just like Donald had. I didn't want to go through those dark days again. But the more time I spent with Joseph, the more I realized he was nothing like Donald on the inside. So I took a gamble and decided to trust his kindness and marry him. And that decision paid off. Joseph was incredibly kind, with a warm smile, gentle words, and caring gestures. In the end, the only thing he had in common with Donald was his face. As I looked at Donald, slumped on the sofa, I thought about how grateful I was to have married Joseph. Realizing this wasn't the right place to talk, we decided to invite Donald inside. We served him a simple meal while I bathed Sarah and got her ready for dinner. During that time, Joseph and Donald sat facing each other, talking about something. After putting Sarah to bed, I sat next to Joseph. "I want Adele to hear this too," Joseph said, prompting Donald to start speaking little by little. Donald had mocked Joseph alongside their parents-in-law. But 2 years after inheriting the company from Alexander, his life took a turn for the worse. Just 2 years later, a trusted subordinate betrayed him and ran off with the company's funds. "Wait, what? You entrusted everything to him? He'd been with the company the longest, and I never thought he'd do something like that." I listened, feeling both shocked and exasperated. To make matters worse, some of the company's confidential information had been leaked to a competitor by other employees. "What kind of company were you running?" Even Joseph, who had built his own business, couldn't help but be astonished. There had also been resistance from smaller businesses they were dealing with, and the company was on the brink of collapse. To be honest, the company had its share of problems even when Alexander was running it. That, along with everything else, eventually led to its downfall. With a deep sigh, Donald finished his story. "So, Donald, what were you doing around here?" "I doubt you came just to tell me that story," Joseph asked. No, I didn't just happen to be here by chance. I was hoping you could help me out financially. I really can't make it on my own anymore." Donald slumped forward, looking defeated. Knowing Donald's pride, even asking for help like this must have wounded him deeply. Joseph and I had already heard rumors from others that Donald had been going around asking relatives for money. "There's no way he's coming to us next, right?" Just a few days ago, Joseph had laughed and said, "By the way, whatever happened with that secretary?" I asked. "I ended up marrying her after we split," Donald replied. "It turns out that he had remarried the secretary who had caused our divorce. But when rumors about the company's collapse started circulating, she suddenly disappeared. Apparently, she had been seeing another man, and as soon as the trouble started, she ran off with him." Clenching his trembling fists, Donald slammed the table. "I took care of her. They're all ungrateful." "Hey, that table is something I picked out. Can you stop hitting it, please?" I couldn't help but chime in. Donald continued to rant, trashing his former secretary and employees with bitterness. Both Joseph and I were beyond exasperated. It was no wonder the secretary had left. Donald's arrogance was unbearable. I almost felt like thanking her for being the reason our marriage had ended. After a while, we managed to send Donald home, exhausted from all the complaining. He really thinks he did nothing wrong. That's who he is. He thinks the world revolves around him. But now that he knows about you, I have a bad feeling about this, I admitted. Unfortunately, my bad feeling turned out to be right. A few days later, Donald and our former parents-in-law showed up at our house, having heard about our marriage. I looked at the doorbell screen and saw them standing at the front door, wearing unpleasantly smug smiles. With a sycophantic grin, Alexander spoke up. "Well, Joseph, you've grown into such a fine man. I'm so proud of my son. You really take after your father. I'm amazed at how well you've managed the company." Charlotte chimed in, equally sycophantic. Then, turning to me, she added, "And to think, you weren't infertile after all. Good for you. Now you're living in such a big house and married to Donald's brother." "Right. It worked out in the end. I bet you're glad Joseph looks so much like me, huh?" Donald said with a glare. But by now, neither he nor Charlotte, who had revealed their true colors, scared me anymore. "So, Joseph, it's your duty as a son to take care of us, right?" and Alexander looked up at Joseph. Joseph looked at them with cold eyes. I refuse. Think about everything you've done to me. Why on earth would you expect me to take care of you? We're family. Alexander suddenly stood up, shouting. Charlotte echoed his cries, both of their voices overlapping in a confusing mess of demands. But it was clear they wanted financial support. The people who threw me out aren't family. The only family I have are these two right here. Joseph shouted back at his former parents-in-law. Despite Joseph's outburst, the three of them wouldn't back down. So in the end, Joseph called the police to remove them. This is a family matter. It's a son's duty to take care of his parents and siblings. How could you do this? They screamed to the end about how it was Joseph's obligation, but he never once nodded in agreement. Eventually, the police arrived and escorted all three of them out. As they were being led away, I couldn't resist throwing one last truth at them, something I had never said before. By the way, the reason Donald and I couldn't have kids was because Donald had infertility issues. We found out from the hospital, but no one ever listened to me, so I never got to say it. The three of them stopped in their tracks, eyes wide with shock. No way. They stared at me, their faces frozen in disbelief, before being ushered into the police car, which drove away with them. After they were taken away, we were granted a restraining order, and they never appeared in front of us again. Not long after that, peace returned to our lives. Joseph and I brought his biological mother, Natalie, to live with us and care for her. After divorcing Joseph's father, she had worked hard for years on her own, but the strain had finally taken its toll on her health. She didn't need help with everything, but we offered a hand where she needed it. Unlike Charlotte, Natalie was neither arrogant nor overbearing. She was kind and gentle, much like Joseph. Her tone, her movements, everything about her was soft and peaceful, and our home life reflected that calmness. Perhaps because of this newfound peace, I soon became pregnant with our second child. Natalie would often offer me kind words. Don't push yourself too hard. Make sure to rest when you're tired, she'd say, always gentle and caring. Our baby was growing healthily, and Sarah was eagerly awaiting the arrival of her new sibling. I wonder if it'll be a boy or a girl, she'd say, pressing her ear against my belly, listening with such anticipation. Watching her brought a smile to my face. There's one regret I've carried for a long time, missing my mother's final moments. Even now, I think about how I should have gone to see her, even if it meant going against everyone's wishes. That's why I volunteered to take care of Natalie. At first, she hesitated, but after Joseph and I insisted, she finally agreed. Joseph thanked me for it, but I only wanted to ensure he didn't go through the same regret I did. In a way, I see Natalie as the mother I lost, and I've decided to stay by her side until the very end. I hope these peaceful days will continue forever.
I'm housing you? You're letting me live here? For a measly sum? The words from my husband make my mouth twitch in annoyance. That's right. You do no housework, sleep for 5 hours, and you're just squatting in Dennis's house. You're like the black sheep of the family. Why don't you just leave? Black sheep, huh? Who's the real black sheep here? A subtle smile escapes my tightened lips. At my mother-in-law's words, I just don't care anymore. Is that so? Well, if you insist, I'll take my leave. That was the last time I saw my mother-in-law and husband. My name is Carlene McVie. I'm 32 and work for a certain company in Boston. It's a pretty big company. Work there earnestly for a decade, and you'll be in a respectable position with a decent income. 2 years ago, I also married Dennis, who works for a similar-sized company. We live in a newly built house. It must seem like smooth sailing to everyone around us. I met Dennis, who's a year older, through a friend's introduction. First impression, he seemed sincere. He often talked about his mother, and I liked that he valued family. We didn't have a fiery, romantic start, but we kinda started dating and then kinda got married. Even after marriage, we had no children because we both needed to continue working. We lived in a house too big for just the two of us, enjoying a comfortable newlywed life. Because we're both working, we often missed each other. However, we made sure to value the time we spent together, and we had no financial problems. I thought we were doing well. Well, until now. Unlike me, who's lived alone since starting college, Dennis lived with his parents until just before our marriage. Born and raised in Boston, both his college and current workplace are not far from his family home. I only know his late father through photos. Dennis was still in high school when his father passed away. Probably, he didn't want to leave his mother alone. I met that mother-in-law for the first time at a dinner arranged for both families to meet. Dennis had told me his mother was about the same age as my own, but she looked much younger, a truly beautiful woman. Nice to meet you, Carlene. My son speaks so highly of you. Please take good care of him. Mother-in-law smiled warmly as she spoke, and I couldn't sense any of the hardship she must have endured after losing her husband. Nice to meet you too, mother-in-law. I'm looking forward to becoming a family. I remember feeling relieved, thinking that this person and I might actually build a good family relationship together. Our home seemed to promise a fulfilling future, always filled with laughter and warmth. Both my parents and my mother-in-law were fully supportive of our marriage, and the preparations moved along surprisingly smoothly. We set the date for the wedding and our house under construction was nearly complete. Before embarking on our married life, we made some decisions. We agreed we'd both work for a while, so we needed to pre-plan on chores, taking care of my mother-in-law, and financial matters. Firstly, chores would be handled by whoever was available at the time. Then, regarding mother-in-law, she was still healthy and had father-in-law's inheritance, so she wouldn't struggle financially. We decided it would be best if we lived separately. Up to this point, all was good. But then came the issue of money. I thought splitting all expenses, including the mortgage, would be fair. Dennis had different ideas. Dennis proposed that I handle the mortgage payments while he takes care of the other living expenses. This gave me pause. I'd heard of couples splitting everything or pooling resources, but Dennis's suggestion was unusual. The monthly mortgage alone is $2,700. I had thought from the beginning that this was too heavy a burden. The 3-story house was too big, even if we were to have children. And the large property, mostly chosen by Dennis, seemed daunting to manage. Looking back, I realize I'd already made several wrong choices. But I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I didn't want any financial disagreements before marriage, so I convinced myself to agree with Dennis's proposal. In addition to the mortgage, there are other costs, like groceries, utility bills, and taxes. I had no idea how much I would regret that decision later on. Every month, we put all our payments into a joint account in Dennis's name. This includes the mortgage, living expenses, travel costs, and future savings. The monthly withdrawals are hefty, but we're both high earners to begin with. Given our busy work schedules and limited time off, the joint account should have been continually growing. Why isn't there as much money as I expected? I stumbled upon it by chance. I casually opened our savings book to see how much we had saved up. Wondering if we had some major expenses, I couldn't recall anything significant. That left the possibility that Dennis might have spent on something, but he didn't mention anything during our last family meeting. We both have busy work schedules. I leave before Dennis wakes up, and he comes home after I've gone to bed. So, we often don't get to talk much, even though we live together. To break through this disconnect, we started having regular family meetings. We discuss big financial decisions like how to spend our savings and future travel plans. We just had a family meeting a few days ago. Seeing our savings dwindle without hearing anything about it at that meeting is odd. Huh? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Scanning through the latest transactions, I realized Dennis hadn't transferred his share of the living expenses for this month. I glanced at the calendar. It's been 3 days since payday. We're supposed to contribute our share by then. Maybe he just forgot? Dennis was coming home late today. I'll ask him gently tomorrow, I thought, and then forgot all about it. I didn't remember until 3 months later. Come to think of it, I never actually checked. Did he make the transfer like he was supposed to? With that thought, I open the drawer in our living room TV stand and pull out the bank book for our joint account, which is under Dennis' name. I flip through the pages and my eyes widen. What's going on here? The balance had decreased even more since last time. A growing sense of distrust fills me. I can hear my own heartbeat ringing in my ears. A sinking feeling crosses my mind, and with trembling fingers, I flip the pages back. My worst fears are confirmed. You've got to be kidding me. Household expenses haven't been transferred for 3 months. Dennis didn't come home until late that night, and we missed each other the next morning. I couldn't confront him due to our conflicting schedules and my growing unease. Finally, I catch him on the weekend and declare that we're having an emergency family meeting. Dennis reluctantly sits on the living room sofa and looks at me. His face is serious, as if he knows I've discovered the truth. You know what this is about, don't you? As much as I wanted to explode in anger, I started the conversation as calmly as possible. Dennis nods quietly. Why haven't the household expenses been paid for the last 3 months? The truth is, what Dennis told me was beyond anything I could have imagined. To cut to the chase, Dennis had quit his job without telling me. This all started 4 months ago. My coworker got promoted before me. Can you believe it? A guy less competent than me. The boss is clueless, the company's a mess. What's the point of staying at a place that can't even evaluate people properly? I was stunned. I couldn't find the words to respond. Sure, it's frustrating to be surpassed by a coworker, I get that. But we have a family, and we just built our house. Shouldn't you secure another job before quitting? Isn't that just common sense? I thought he was a man of integrity. That's why I married him. I don't know this man who speaks so foully. So what's the plan? You are going to find another job, right? Of course. I want to show them. I'm planning to get a job at an even bigger company, so cover our living expenses till then. Dennis seemed unfazed, like he didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He didn't even apologize. Not that I need an apology. But the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Everyone has times when they're unhappy at work and want to quit. I don't love my job every single day either. What hurt most was that he didn't even consult me first. So I agreed to cover the expenses, but only for a short time. Dennis seemed to be actively job hunting while I was at work. Initially, I thought it would be fine. There were job magazines on our living room table. I figured he'd find something soon. But months passed, and I began to realize I had been too optimistic. A year went by, and Dennis still hadn't found a job. You've been supporting me for a year now. Can't you just keep doing it? You're the one with a stable income, anyway. I was already struggling with a mortgage. The cost of living was piling up, making me work harder than ever before. I willingly took on overtime and even worked weekends. I barely had time to breathe, let alone handle chores, and I was sleep-deprived and disoriented. I almost fainted on the train to work today. Dennis's offhand comment didn't sound like a joke to me, and even if it were, I couldn't take it that way. What was the point of our marriage, of me working so hard? I began to lose sight of everything. "I'm going out," I mumbled, knowing Dennis probably wouldn't hear me, and headed for the door. Today is another workday. I have to make money, no matter what. Dragging my feet to work, that's how I get through. Surviving the day on willpower alone, I finally head home, more exhausted than when the day started. It's already past 10 p.m., and it's dark outside. I'm home. As I push the door open, I notice something unfamiliar in the entranceway. A pile of cardboard boxes. What's this? They're too old and sloppily packed to be delivery boxes. Just then, the living room door opened, and Dennis appeared, his face covered in stubble. "Oh, those? They're from my mom. She was having a hard time living alone, so we decided she should move in with us." "What? I didn't hear anything about this." My anger surged. Living together? What on earth is he talking about? Ever since he quit his job without telling me, I've had no idea what he's thinking. I used to worry about his mother living alone. And I even thought we could have a good family relationship. But I didn't know it at the time. That my seemingly cheerful and pleasant mother-in-law would turn out to be a real piece of work. The same could be said for my husband, too. "What are you talking about? She's my mother. Helping her is a given. Are you stupid or something?" That's the vibe I got. At this point, my opinion doesn't matter anymore. I've had enough of understanding this through my married life. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up with a big grin. She hugged Dennis at the front door and gave me a sarcastic smile. "Oh, Carlene, you're here. I heard you're always busy with work, so I assumed you wouldn't be around." The words, "You probably don't do much housework, do you?" cracked my already fragile heart even more. My malevolent mother-in-law and my unemployed husband, Dennis. I couldn't see any hope for the future. Life with my mother-in-law was harder than I had ever imagined. When I'd get home late from work, she'd snark. "What are you doing not taking care of the house? You're failing as a wife." Dennis, far from defending me, would add insult to injury. "I'm letting you live in my house, so at least do the housework." How easy it would have been to say, "You're not working, so why don't you do it?" But no, that would only lead to more insults and emotional wounds. I didn't even have the energy to argue back anymore. My mother-in-law would just loaf around the house all day and never do any housework, as if it's the norm. Dennis had become so entitled to being taken care of that job listings magazines had disappeared from our living room. The only thing I could do while dealing with these two burdens was to work relentlessly. I needed money to live. More than that, while engrossed in my job, I could forget the harsh reality. People around me probably found it strange to see me more focused on work than I was before getting married, despite not being married for very long. Occasionally, I felt concerned glances my way, but I was grateful they didn't say anything. If someone shows me kindness now, I'm afraid I won't be able to go on. Long days of working late, catching the last train home, squeezing in just 5 hours of sleep, and then heading back to the office as soon as dawn breaks. At this point, weekdays and weekends don't even matter. But I do plan on taking a half-day off sometime this weekend. And the fact that I have to use that precious half-day for a family meeting to tell those two that we can't continue living like this especially when my savings keep dwindling, almost breaks me. I knew my mother-in-law was constantly ordering food delivery, but recently even Dennis has been joining in. They've been indulging in steak and caviar during the day. What's worse, they've even been taking trips together. For now, they're just day trips, but it could escalate to international travel. I used to put extra money into our joint account, but now that I've realized how much they're spending, I only transfer just enough to cover the monthly withdrawals. In other words, if they keep up this spending, payments will start falling behind, leading to a worst-case scenario. So here we are, the three of us gathered in the living room over the weekend. The two of them, now shadows of their former friendly and genuine selves, are glaring at the papers I've spread out on the coffee table. "What's the meaning of this, Carlene? What are you trying to say with all this paperwork?" My mother-in-law squints up at me. "It's a breakdown of our income and expenses. We can't continue living like this. I told you, I'll pay it all back when I get a job. Just hold on a bit. And the mortgage is just a measly $2,700. I'm letting you live in my house, so don't make a fuss over such a measly sum." My house? You're letting me live here? Measly sum? Words I can't ignore make my lips twitch. That's right. You're the black sheep here, sleeping 5 hours a day, not doing any housework, and living in Dennis's house. Why don't you just leave? Black sheep? Who's the real black sheep here? A laugh escapes my tightened lips. At my mother-in-law's words, everything suddenly becomes inconsequential. Or maybe, just maybe, I've finally realized that there was never any need to try so hard. All right, no more bending over backward. Not for these people. I felt like a weight had lifted from my body and soul. Is that okay? Well then, I'll take you up on that and leave. My voice echoed in the once quiet living room. I must be smiling more than I ever have before. Huh? What? Both of them looked stunned, their eyes glued to the coffee table. What I smoothly pulled off and placed on top of the papers was a bundle of divorce papers. Of course, they were already filled out and stamped by me. Here, you sign it too. It'll make your mom feel more secure, won't it? Mumbling, Dennis picked up the pen from the table. He hesitated for a moment but was encouraged by his gleeful mother to sign. I'll be moving out within this month. Don't worry, I'll submit these papers to the court immediately after the move. Fine. Goodbye, black sheep. Whatever they called me, my heart was unshaken. 2 weeks later. The day had finally come. The weather was perfect and a pleasant breeze was blowing. It was the perfect day to start a new life. I need this and that moved, too. Yes, everything. As I instructed the movers, I was bustling around what had become someone else's home. After all, I had to move everything that was purchased with my money or had a receipt in my name. Hey, you're taking the coffee table, the sofa, and even the TV? You're stripping the living room bare. Such a sneaky cat thief. They were both following me around, shouting. To be honest, they were just in the way. If you say this house, under your name, is yours, then all of this stuff paid for by me is mine, right? I finished my last set of instructions, let out a sigh, and turned around. The two of them fell silent at my words, looking at me bewildered. I glanced at them and turned on my heel. Well then, goodbye. That was the last time I saw both of them. I completed the move without any issues and immediately submitted the divorce papers. They were promptly accepted, and I was free. Not having to share mortgage payments or contribute to a joint account was a relief, and I was surprised at how much money I had left over. I never realized I was earning this much. Over the past year, paydays had been depressing. I was genuinely shocked when I realized my monthly payments didn't even total $1,000. Later, I found out what happened to my ex-husband Dennis and my former mother-in-law after I left them. Because they lost me as the breadwinner, they started falling behind on all their bills. Demand letters started piling up at their home. Dennis, ever so proud, ignored all of it. He didn't consult with the bank or the IRS. Eventually, they were faced with demands for a lump sum payment. Unable to pay, Dennis borrowed money from a loan shark to cover it. But that wasn't the end of their problems. Realizing you can't avoid repaying loan sharks, Dennis finally swallowed his pride and started doing manual labor at a low-paying job. Had it not been for his period of unemployment, he could have found a more decent job. But that's none of my business now. As for mother-in-law, her pension wasn't enough to live on. So, she started working a part-time job. She's now a cashier and has a reputation as the lady who can't do her job right. Not surprising for someone who was ungrateful, never worked, and just ordered food delivery all the time. But, again, that's none of my business. As for me, I'm enjoying my single life. My skin has improved, and even I can tell that my expression has softened. People tell me I smile more now and that I've become more attractive. I hardly do any overtime work, and I can fully relax on weekends. I even have time to enjoy my hobbies. My life is just like it was before marriage, but because my married life was so miserable, everything now feels incredibly wonderful. I've also been getting along well with a popular guy at work. He had been interested in me for a while but hesitated to approach me because I was married. Anyway, life is smooth sailing this time around, that's for sure. I'm feeling great today.